Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to give people a chance to join in this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Please feel free to engage with others in the chat today. All right. How are we doing? Got a good group of people. I'll just give everyone one more minute before we start.
Not too loud.
Oh, I think people, lots of people are unmuted. Here we go. I'll just mute you for now. But you all still have the power to unmute yourselves if you have a question that you would like to ask. Great. Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Miranda, and I am the manager of public and network engagement here at CFC. Before we get started and get into all of the content today, I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. So, hello, I'm Miranda. I live in Toronto. My pronouns are she, her. And I want to acknowledge that the place that I'm in, the land that I currently occupy, this is the land, the territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, the Anishinaabe, and more specifically, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I was born and raised in Tkaronto, also known as Toronto or Toronto, and I come from 5 generations of Scottish, Welsh, and Irish immigrants to Canada, most of them settling on Cree and Métis land in the prairies, and Blackfoot, Okanagan, and Coast Salish land further west. My ancestors and myself are all guests here. I make a personal commitment to this work, in particular by educating myself about the colonial history of my ancestors, Canada, the country of my citizenship, and taking action by advocating for the rights of Indigenous people to friends, family, my colleagues, and elected officials, and in my own personal reparations as someone who benefits from colonialism every day. During this election season, I am committed to getting in touch with all candidates and asking what their voting record will be on Indigenous rights, and if they're incumbents, asking them about their party's current record on Indigenous rights. So, welcome to today's session. Allison is on board today, so she'll be available later for questions also. But today we are talking about communications and your vital signs launch strategy. So we have already been doing so many sessions with all of you about how to work with a vital signs report during a pandemic. And we are continuing on that vein and talking about what a digital first launch looks like. Of course, your context is going to be different depending on where you are in the country, and we're all at different points. Some of us can gather in big groups, but a lot of us are still going to have digital first vital signs launches. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be covering a lot today. So I am going to go fairly quickly, but we can send this along, and we're also recording it so you can review after, and we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. So we'll talk about what a communication strategy looks like overall, high level, what you should be considering. The next is communication tactics, so how you can execute that strategy. The next thing we'll talk about is promoting the digital platform. So many of you have worked with us and the IISD, and I believe that we have Matt from the IISD on this call, who will be available to take questions later also. But we'll be talking about that from a communications perspective. So how are you going to share this out and help people understand how to use the digital platform? The next is the federal election, because that is coming up on September 20th. And so I think it's a great opportunity to think about how vital signs can dovetail with this opportunity. And then of course, next steps, key dates, and then Q&A. Okay, great. So here we go. Basics of a communications strategy. So the first thing that you always want to consider is who is your audience. And this isn't really going to change if you're having a digital first campaign or not. So is it your donors, the community at large, public, nonprofit or community leaders, or your board members? Who is the report for and who is your promotion for? And then how will you reach them? But that's getting a little bit into tactics. The next is objectives. So why are you doing vital signs and what do you want to achieve through your report launch? Your key messages. These are the key takeaways from the report that you will want people to remember. And then also calls to action. These key messages should resonate through all of your messaging, from any public speaking to social media, press releases if you want to go that route, because it helps people remember, and it has consistent messaging, will create a whole narrative for the entire report. And a key way to measure success of a communications campaign, specifically a digital one, is to measure message echo. So that's kind of like the jargon term for this, or like the communications term is message echo. And what that means is that you see your audience repeating your own key messages back to you. So if you're looking on social media, or even having a conversation with someone in a meeting through Zoom or in person, hearing them use some of the same language that you're using back to you. And that's a qualitative way that you can know that your campaign and your key messaging is working. The next is milestones and key dates. So that's just, looking at your overall communication strategy. Are there other things that you're launching at the same time? And then looking at your community also. So are there other events in your community that you could align with, and that would actually be a great opportunity for you to promote vital signs through, or some things that you actually want to avoid aligning with? And of course, another consideration is holidays, and making sure that there aren't a lot of conflicts there. And then the last thing is, of course, content. So how will the content align with all of the things that I already mentioned? And this is why it's important to integrate communications, or thinking about your communication strategy, pretty early on, because the objectives should be clear from the beginning of the Vital Signs project, and even have some ideas about what the key messages will be, even if you don't have them like written down on paper yet, rather than building a comm strategy backwards from a completed report. Okay, so that's an overall summary of what you should include in a communication strategy. And this is pretty standard, whether it's going to be, a print campaign that you're doing, you're going to do in-person events, or a completely digital first campaign. Next slide, please. Oh, can you, are we on it? Yeah, okay, great, thanks, sorry about that. Okay, so getting into tactics. Where is your audience and how can you reach them there? So this has changed if you're not doing something in person. So you need to consider, where is your audience? Where do they spend their time? Where did they spend their time? How do you reach them right now? And who are groups that you are a part of your audience, but you're not currently reaching? Where would they have gathered before the pandemic? And what is the virtual equivalent of that now? So for example, you may have done a bit of guerrilla marketing for Vital Signs before and dropped off print copies of the report at a local coffee shop or community center. Where have those spaces migrated through the pandemic to be virtual spaces? So for example, local neighborhood groups on Facebook. You can partner with those groups or talk to the moderators of those groups to help with distribution or inviting those people to your launch, or sharing some of your key messages through social media with them. These are just some ideas. So another thing to think about is, what tools and platforms do you have available to you already? So you might have a listserv at your community foundation. Social media is free. Not everyone has the capacity to run social media all the time, but you can look into that as a free option to distribute vital signs information. Contacting the media is also free. You don't have to pay for a press release on the wire. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. So there are a lot of free options. And like what I mentioned before, neighborhood groups, community organizations have pages and other things like that online. And then the last thing is that, we're talking about all of this stuff happening in virtual spaces and virtual platforms. But what we really want to do is have these virtual conversations, this data, this information that we are presenting digitally, and turn them into conversations that people are having with their neighbors, their friends, their family around the dinner table, and then respond to the calls to action in real life with taking real action. So whether it's making a donation or volunteering or perhaps writing their federal candidates, whatever you decide those calls to action will be, you want your virtual digital communications to have an IRL in real life impact. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Launch event. Okay, so I think a lot of you, now that we are a year and a half through the pandemic, have attended some events virtually. And there are so many different ways that I think that you could host what you would have done in person, online still, and have a really great impact. So the first consideration, which we've talked about a little bit already, is the platform and reaching your target audience. So if your target audience is donors only, then TikTok is probably not where you want to host your launch event. Facebook for that demographic, or like the bulk of that demographic, because we don't want to forget about young people. But Facebook might be a better platform to run a live event, for example, if you want to go public or to do something privately on Zoom. Just think about what is accessible and what platform is your audience already on, because you want to remove the barriers that people will have to going to your event. You want people to go, and meeting them where they are is going to be the most effective thing to do. The next thing is multimedia. So I think this is pretty straightforward. You're all experienced presenters. You know that multimedia is important. And more than ever before, creating really great visual content is easier. Like, it's easier, it's free. And I would be, well, as a communications team at CFC, we're working on some resources to help support you in using some templates and things that we'll be creating for this specifically. And then format, all of the same kind of formats that you would have at a real in-person event can translate. So whether it's like a formal press conference style, a keynote speech, a panel, or breakout sessions, that can translate virtually. And for speakers, thinking again about your audience, who's going to resonate with your audience? Because if they don't resonate, then people probably won't come. And then also, who has the message that your audience needs to hear? So who is someone that can deliver and incorporate some of those key messages? And then finally, again, the calls to action. How is that going to be articulated? How are people going to feel when they leave the event? What are the next steps going to be coming out of a launch event? So, you know, like the report is here, it's launched, what's next? What do you do with the report? You want to have clear answers to those questions figured out and articulated to the audience at your launch event. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, here's a little bit of communications jargon, community micro-influencers. But I'm going to tell you, this is the same thing that has existed forever, which is that there are community leaders who are influential because they organize, because they share information, because they volunteer. And this is the exact same thing, except it is the language that's used for this happening digitally. So these are people who have influence within their community. They're people who have a platform online. They don't need to have a lot of followers. So the idea of a micro influencer is that they might just have, 200 followers, but within that group, within your community. So that can be a really small community, a town, a county. Those people still with that smaller group of people, they have influence. So this can be, community leaders, also business leaders, thought leaders. These are really important people to build relationships with, and that can help you distribute your vital signs report. And so another important part of this is knowledge mobilization. And I'm using some of this language so that if you hear it elsewhere, you'll know what it means. And this is a government term. So if you're applying for government grants, you'll see this and you'll understand, hopefully. So this is becoming a really important term, which is, we have this data. How can you make it digestible and accessible to your audience? So this is really important. This is something that community micro-influencers can help with. You can send them an amplification package, which is something that contains key messages and graphics or sample posts that they can share with their network or through a listserv. And then just copy and paste to share that messaging. And this can also double as a media kit. So more traditionally, a media kit has now become an amplification package that you don't just share with media, but you also share with your stakeholders, partners, and then you can also share with community micro-influencers. And what they can do, what you can ask them to do is, take your key messages and then turn it into their own content so that their audience, who is your audience, will understand your key messages and really be able to digest that data. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so media has changed so much. And throughout the pandemic, I would say there is even more community reporting going on virtually. But of course, traditional media is still extremely essential in distributing information and reporting on the news, and investigative journalism, and reaching out to media is free. So the first thing to do is if you don't already, so a lot of this is starting from okay, if we're at point A, how can we get to point B? So the first thing is to create a media list. And so what you can do to build your own media list is, start big, look at the national papers that have reporters who are assigned to your region or specific issues, and find their emails. Usually they are accessible on those websites, but then also look at your local papers, look at bloggers, or even moderators of community online groups. They're not technically media, but they play a very similar role now. People who are gatekeepers of information, you can put all those people on this list. You can also sometimes find email addresses for media on their Twitter bios. Some of them post them publicly if they're open to getting pitches. And then the next thing would be to build relationships with them. So this is this has like a way higher efficacy of getting your press release published or having a story written about your vital signs report, is if you give them a call and say, hey, I've got a press release I'm going to send you or have already sent you. Here's my pitch in 30 seconds. Here you go. That's going to really increase your chances of getting something published. So you can write a press release or an advisory and invite them to your digital launch event. So, there are still not a lot of outdoor activities for reporters to be going to. It's picking up, but they're looking for things to do. And they do attend digital events. So don't forget to invite them. Another thing to look at too and this is for bigger cities, and this is another professional term, which is why I'll use it, which is ethnic media. So there's a lot of papers that are published within cultural communities. And this is a huge area of potential because, of course, it's really important to build relationships with them, but also because they have huge networks, and it's a very small cost to place content if you want to do paid content specifically. So there are so many different ways to interact with the media. And just because this is a virtual first approach to looking at how to launch a vital signs report, there are lots of ways to engage them still. Okay, next slide, please. I'm actually going to turn it over to Allison, who is going to talk about vital conversations. Where are you? Here, I'll spotlight you, Allison.
Thanks, Miranda. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how you might use vital conversation events after you've published your report to generate some conversation, but also action as a result of your vital signs. Of course, more of these are happening in a virtual context. So the Zoom room is a more common location to host a vital conversation these days. Excuse me. But vital conversations are really good opportunities for your foundation to showcase and share the data. And again, going back to those key messages that Miranda was discussing, to really reiterate what the most important findings you wanted to speak about are with community. So it's a good way to raise awareness about those key messages, but also to take it one step further. So you can invite people with lived experience in the areas that you wanted to speak about the most to really bring kind of a personalized view towards the data. So for example, if you were speaking about youth suffering from mental health crises, you might invite or host a conversation that is specific for youth who can share their experience and talk a little bit about what might be potential solutions. So that brings us to the next point. These opportunities and these conversations with community can be really useful in bringing people together to discuss. Now that we know what the issues are, we know what the most important or pressing matters are in the community, what are some potential solutions that we can work towards and collaborate on? So you might find that you're inviting people with lived experience. You can invite local decision makers. You can invite funders, your board. You can invite a bunch of different types of folks to these events to think about nonprofits and subject matter experts to think about how can we all work together to think about solutions and collaborate to improve circumstances locally. And with that, you can really come out of those events with key steps, next steps for people to take together in ways that they might take action towards kind of moving the needle forward on some of those key issues that you raised. So vital conversations are a great opportunity at various stages of your vital signs, but at the end, when you've released and you're sharing the data, it's a really opportune moment to take it that one step further and actionize some of those items.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. Great. So, digital platform. So, some of you, actually quite a few of the vital signs cohort for this year have opted into the digital platform with IISD. And so this is very exciting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone's platforms and how you've configured them and the data and the little bits and bobs that you've personalized it with. But specifically speaking about communicating about the digital platform and how to use it, it's really important to think about your narrative and your key messages and including important data points throughout that, but then using the narrative to weave it all together. Not everyone can look at numbers alone and then draw connections between them or understand the bigger picture looking at a single statistic. So using examples and personal and real stories from the community through your communications campaign to reaffirm your key messages and bring the statistics to life is really important. So considering different ways of learning, I'm definitely a visual learner. So numbers alone don't mean a lot to me unless there's something tangible instead of abstract. So, charts, infographics, photos, any visual aid, and then stories. So that's where your key messages come in and the narrative that you're building about the whole report. And then, of course, there's change management. So a lot of community foundations who have put vital signs out year after year, your audiences are going to be used to one particular thing, and now it's going to be different. So remembering to bring your audience along with you so they know what to expect and how to navigate will be really important. So consider having dedicated communications, introducing the digital platform to them specifically, explaining the rationale, and then also how to use it. I think, as I mentioned before, or maybe I haven't yet, Matt from ISD is on the call, and he will be available to take questions when we get to the Q&A section later. Okay, we're making great time. We're getting into this final section on the federal election. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please, Allison? Great. Okay, this is very basic, but I'm going to explain because remaining nonpartisan is obviously a little bit challenging, especially when there are so many issues that are front and center during an election campaign. So, and the second point is a little nuanced also, so I'll explain. So as you know, there is a formal cap on how much charities can do when it comes to advocacy, so formal lobbying. This doesn't mean you can't. And I encourage you, if you meet with your elected officials, to register as a lobbyist. I know that some EDs, CEOs have done that over the years. Of course, it's just important to be prudent. And so some tips on engaging online or virtually is just to make sure that you're engaging with everyone, first of all of the parties. And there are many parties, as you know, but a good rule of thumb, just to make sure you're covered, is to make sure that you are engaging with all of the parties online who are featured in the official debates. And of course, there are a lot of questions about democracy and how those parties are chosen to be included in the debate. But in terms of how the government is going to decide on this, you could usually follow their directive on that, and that engagement will be considered fine and nonpartisan because you are talking to, let's say, the top 5 parties. And then the other thing is not referring publicly to government funded programs, specifically those that are open right now or coming up for funding, though there are some that are okay. So depending on the department, they have different rules, depending on the ministry. So if you are a part of Communities for Gender Equality cohort, ECSF program, or HCI, you will have received instructions, or you will be receiving instructions about the rules tailored to your specific program. But talking about issues broadly, talking about the data in your vital signs report, that is absolutely fair game. Next slide, please. Okay, so those are the rules, but there are so many opportunities I'm very excited about this. Okay, so you can, if you want to, directly relate vital signs data to election issues. So implicitly, this could look like a standalone data point with maybe like a very basic key message, and then you add like a hashtag election 44. So you're making it a part of the discourse just implicitly. Or a more explicit example could be, a post or something in a newsletter that says, this, let's just say housing affordability is an issue here locally. Here is the data in our vital signs report. We would like parties to respond, or we invite parties to respond. That's making it a little bit more directed, but it's still nonpartisan because you're just saying, here's a piece of data. What do you think about it? So as a communicator, I don't really believe that anything is totally unbiased. So even if it's totally neutral, then if there's no message, then what you are communicating isn't really going to have an impact if there's no message. And even journalistic pieces that are agnostic and adhere to all of the journalistic ethics, what you choose not to report on can say just as much. And it's kind of the same for vital signs. So what you choose to include in the report and what you choose not to include in the report is sending a message. So it's important to think about that and then how you position the data, and just be aware that there is an underlying message, even if you're just presenting one single statistic. When it comes to the election, we will be sending all community foundations an amplification package of some key messages that we have developed for the sector to support communities across the country, echoing what we heard during the summit in June. And so you can take a look at that, and if you're interested in connecting vital signs to some election material, and what we have with professional consultants figured out is nonpartisan, but something that we can actually call on all candidates for, you can use that as an example. And this is not unprecedented. So community foundations have used vital signs specifically on local, for local advocacy issues. So, and also if anyone's on the call, you can please correct me of the details if I get any of it wrong. Vancouver found data one year about children aging out of care, out of foster care, and how the age was young enough that they weren't fully supported to live a life with the same opportunities as other young people. And so they did formal advocacy with the government on getting better support for children aging out of foster care. Also, I think this is North Okanagan. Again, welcome for corrections if it's needed. Used vital signs as a cross-reference and looking at the candidates and how they scored in different issue areas based on what they had said or what their party's platform was, and then release that publicly. Some other things that you can do that are nonpartisan are hosting a vital signs themed all candidates debate. Or co-hosting with a community organization. Sometimes community orgs, other charities do host all candidate debates. And vital signs would be a great lens to look at that because vital signs is nonpartisan. Another thing is to send a letter to all candidates and include data from vital signs to support any recommendations or requests or calls to action, depending on how strong you want to be, whatever fits your community foundation. And you can do that and use vital signs as your catalyzer for that. And then the other thing is just to support local organizations who are trying to get out the vote. And vital signs can be a great tool that local community organizations can use to engage their community members in understanding the issues of what's going on around them. So there's so many great opportunities to partner with local organizations to make our democracy great. Okay, that's my pitch for democracy, and I'm sure you're all on board. So in terms of tactics and opportunities virtually, these are kind of like the big pieces that I think that we can all work on together this fall. And looking forward, Allison, if you could go to the next slide, please. Key dates. This is what we are looking at. So this is soon, so it is not a deadline, but we at CFC, of course, we want to support you in your launch. And if you send me your key messages, then we can work that into our own social media. If you let me know when you are, I think you actually have already let Allison know when you're planning on launching Vital Signs, then we can build that into our communication strategy. And we'll need that about a week out from the election to be, or not the election, sorry. I need some time before the launch to be able to put that together and make sure that I'm representing all of you accurately. So if you could send them to me by the 10th, that would be great. Then of course we have the election on the 20th, and then the 22nd is the deadline to send in your reports. Yes, to upload to our website so that we can also have those ready to go and promote through Vital Signs Week. October 4th to 8th is the Vital Signs Week, which you are aware of. And again, this is of course flexible, but we can have a bigger impact, especially virtually, if we do it together, because people will see a lot of these key messages coming up and it'll have a bigger impact. There will be bigger message echo. I'm going to do a quiz later. Just kidding. Okay. It's a Thursday. No one wants a pop quiz. And then in late October, we'll be doing a postmortem feedback. And then in November, some really wonderful learning sessions to think through and strategize what is next after Vital Signs. How do we keep Vital Signs alive all year? It's a great question. And Allison is still on the call and she can answer any questions about that. Now we are in the question and answer period. People are also welcome to, if you want to add, if you want to use the raise hand function and I can unmute you, or you can just ask your questions in the chat, whatever you are most comfortable with. And then also if you have your own ideas that you want to share and get feedback on, this is very casual, so feel free to jump in. There's a great question here. Do we need to register as lobbyists if we amplify your messages? No. The answer is no. So I don't have the specific rules around this directly, but I believe that you have to register as a lobbyist if you are meeting privately with elected officials. Public messages are not considered formal lobbying or even formal advocacy for that matter. So this would be, yeah, lobbying is when you are officially engaged with elected representatives. So that you also don't need to register as a lobbyist if you send a letter, for example. It's just in the context of like private communications, private meetings where, you know, the registering as a lobbyist is to help introduce a layer of integrity into that process because you get that one-on-one access with an elected representative. Yeah. And as a private individual, you don't have to register as a lobbyist, but if you are lobbying on behalf of an organization, that's when it's important. Any other questions? Any questions about the digital platform? No, okay. I'll give you a few, I'll just give you another minute as you're thinking. There was a lot of information downloaded in this session. So actually, Allison, can you go to the next slide? I'll just walk through this. So we are starting to put up all of the events that are upcoming through the Learning Institute and our other programs on the event page for September. And we have uploaded over 20 new resources to the resource library over the summer. If you thought we were just chilling all summer, we were not. We were uploading things to the resource library for you. So I'm super excited about this because there's a lot of really practical fact sheets that we have put up there, some HR policy guides and manuals. And of course, anything that is vital signs related is up there as well. And then final slide, Allison, please, and thank you. Of course, we would like to thank our Vital Signs partner, Leith Wheeler, who has been supporting us through this whole journey and was an incredible partner for our summit as well, and did some great Vital Signs trivia. I don't know if anyone here participated, but that was a great time. So thanks to Leith Wheeler for continuing to support Vital Signs. And I am here to support you. So in my role as public manager of public and network engagement, I am a bridge between communications and network learning and engagement, the Learning Institute. So I work with Tracy closely. And so if you have questions about your communication strategy for your Vital Signs launch, feel free to get in touch with me. Program questions are best sent to Allison, but I can help answer those as well. But I am here to support you with your communication strategy. So feel free to get in touch. Are there any more questions? Thanks, Matt. So Matt's put his email here as well, if you've got questions about the digital platform. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Great. Okay. Well, here we are. It's 1:45 Eastern. Thank you everyone for joining today. We are so excited to see your Vital Signs reports and also to learn a lot about your community and what is going on locally and what's important to you. Yeah, we're really looking forward to this Vital Signs week. Happy Thursday.